Hey everyone, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm sure on YouTube people are going to be joining it in different increments. As we talk about this movie, our first time tonight. Hey everyone, I want to thank you for joining. Sorry about that. Doubled up on my sound. I am joined by my friend, fellow pastor at Reaching Our City, Arodi Sanchez. Tonight we are going to be talking about 12 Years a Slave. And so part of what we want to do, what we're trying to do here, is to make sure that um, essentially that we model a kind of conversation together that we think people need to be having out there in the real world, so to speak. And we're gonna invite all of you to participate on in the chat and ask your questions there, and we're gonna do our best to kind of show that and everything and answer anything that you have there. But hopefully everyone's had a chance to watch the movie and are ready to discuss it some. So Arodi, thanks for being here tonight as we talk on here and see if anybody really joins us or not. Uh, Want to talk about this movie, 12 Years a Slave.
Absolutely.
That first question, obviously, that I had for us was essentially, what's your gut reaction having watched that movie? What are you feeling after that? There's a visceral impact that we have when we watch that. We don't often experience these issues directly ourselves, but we do experience them kind of vicariously through the lens of a filmmaker. So what are you feeling after having watched 12 Years a Slave?
Well, that was a pretty strong movie. Very a lot of emotions going through my heart and my mind as I watched that movie. Really, for me, it was I really had an experience. I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I never had an experience to see the whole movie and see the whole plot. And it was I don't know that the word shocking uh, was uh, was necessary because we have heard and read about this, but it was more heartbreaking in the way of how they how there was such a lack of empathy in the world. Uh, that the lack of empathy, not just for those who were enslaving uh, uh, African American folks, but also the lack of empathy between those who were enslaved themselves.
Yeah,
Uh, this lack of empathy had transmitted uh, among everybody that was in contact with the slavery, and
right.
it was really that for me was very heartbreaking, and I could relate to that a lot. But yeah, obviously my emotions were of anger, frustration, uh, and also uh, just being heartbroken about the lack of empathy that is displayed. That um, it was most likely the reality of that situation.
Yeah, I like that word, a lack of empathy. Man, what do you do when you spend so much time dehumanizing people, and not only just individual dehumanization, but the whole system? I mean, slaves were considered property, and what really struck me, my feeling disgusted, feeling embarrassed, being on the side of being white people, in that sense, and thinking, oh my gosh, how could a human being do this to another human being? Really just kept working me over, I think. And I'm just don't know what to think about when we really look at history honestly. And I'm a big proponent, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, that in order to move forward, you have to be honest about the past. You have to confess the truth. And that's part of the reason why we're doing what we're doing. We want to talk about the truth of slavery. And some of the shows have kind of shown it kind of lightly. Um, they've glorified the antebellum South, and we're having that issue right now of, oh, this is our history, and it's really not. It was actually propaganda. Tearing down some of these statues and renaming some of these things are countering the propaganda. The South knew how bad it really was. They had a PR war, and the daughters of the Confederacy made sure that they spent a whole generation winning the PR war so that they wouldn't look as bad as they actually were. And I appreciate movies like this that really don't let up and go full force into making us pay attention to what actually happened. Because I think when you do, it makes changing the names of forts and taking down propaganda statues um, a little less um, troubling for people who, and otherwise, I think have a good point about history. You know, history tells a
Yeah.
story, and it's not that this story needs to be told, but it needs to be told in the right way, not in the propaganda way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that really hit me too. Man, as a dad, I couldn't imagine being taken from my family like that, not being able to see them or know anything, and just having to survive, and to know that that was common story for all slaves.
Hmm.
That was pretty rough. That was really rough to think about that. They personalized slavery in a way that I think told the true story, but told the very human story of it. So I think that was important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is showing that all these people, right, the slaves, there were sons and daughters, there were husbands and wives, there were somebody's children, and they have children on their own. I think we see it with the character, especially with this woman called Elisa,
Mm-hmm.
right? She is grieving so hard for her children, and she won't stop. Uh, I mean, it is just mind blowing. We don't know what you will do. You either go. It seems to me that there were two paths. You either accept the reality, or you live in constant despair, where you don't value even your own life because of
Right.
someone's hopelessness. Um, so that was very shocking. That whole there was no middle. There was no way to deal with it. There was not a middle way. It was either I'm gonna be hurting or forever, or I'm gonna accept it. And either way, it's terrible. There's not true option.
No, it's not, and I think that's a really important point. You bring up that scene, that whole interaction, because the slaves, this Eliza is brought to the nice slave master's house, right? And the nice slave master's wife, we first meet her. She's on the porch. She's with her children, and this woman is grieving over her kids, and she basically says, just get to work, just start doing your job, and you'll forget your children in no time.
Hmm.
Um, and ultimately it's the wife that sends her away because she just can't be bothered by the inconvenience of this woman suffering, right? And I think one of the things we're seeing is it is hard when this has not been our suffering as white people. I think it's hard for a lot of white people to hear such a vocalized outward suffering in our society right now being I refer to the biblical word of lament, and we're like, oh, don't bother us, or behave while you're in pain, and control yourself. And we know that pain and grief doesn't really work that way. Anger doesn't really work that way. um, but sometimes it seems like my own white people are more concerned about how it inconveniences them or annoys them or gets in the way of their traffic plans or whatever, and completely overlook this real humanity from a mother to another mother. How can you not grieve? And I think that's happening right now.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very. I was gonna. That was good that you brought that scene because it is. Uh, yeah, it is so. It's almost. I don't know why. Uh, if you think about it, right? So both the person in power, the lack of empathy, it is almost impossible for her to think of this other individual, disenfranchised,
Right.
abused, enslaved, battered, it's almost impossible of her to think of, hey, you know, I can see your pain. I can
Hmm.
see, I understand what you're going through.
Right.
She also sees it as property. I got a question for you. Do you think that at that moment, she had a lack of empathy because she saw her as property, or more because she saw her merely as a black woman that didn't matter? Which was there a difference between the two? Do you think, or which one do you think have more weight? Is property, doesn't matter if it's black or white or whatever, or is this is black as well? What do you think?
I'm sure there's a mixture of it both, but I would lean towards the second one where she saw her as less than. Your life doesn't matter as much as my comfort, right? But I think she understood in some level that she was a human and had children, but that in her mind it's her lot in life to make her comfortable, and as soon as she gets about that, then she'll be fine. So I see it as um, kind of that manifest destiny mentality, that theological persuasion that says you're basically what happens to you in life is predetermined by God's will, and all that nonsense really that I think is nonsense. And even you see the inconvenience of her husband who treats his slaves well, but at the end of the day, he can't be inconvenienced with the truth that Solomon wasn't a slave. He was more concerned about his debts and all of his things, where he tried to be a good Christian master and all of those things that you think, the good, upstanding, like, the person that would say today, well, I've got black friends, or the person that would say, well, I've never used the N word or whatever, but when the push comes to shove, when it threatened his security too, when it threatened his debt load, when it asked him to sacrifice at all, even if it would have been go to the North, send a letter to the North to my friends, he wasn't willing to do that. He really wasn't willing to do that. And that girl, the lady that was grieving, pointed that out. You think he's nice, and yeah, sure, he's nice in terms of everybody else, but you're still his property.
It's a
He doesn't
slaver. Yeah.
really care about you.
Yeah, you got because everybody knew Salomon was not just a common man, right? He was a great musician. He was educated. Like you said, go tell him all that, show him all that to see what he will do. You still be here. You still be trapped. You still be working. It doesn't matter. It seems to be that again, this you see that sense of self-centeredness across the board. You see it certainly again with the enslavers and owners of plantation, but you see it how it transmit to those who are enslaved as well, as how they continue to seek their own well-being. You know, Solomon at one point says, "I'm just trying to survive." He tells Eliza.
Yeah,
Uh,
yes.
Clemens, the guy called Clemens in the boat says, "Just be quiet, don't say anything, just survive." Like and then he gets taken away,
Mm-hmm.
and Solomon is yelling his name, Clemens, Clemens. So
Yeah,
something that is interesting to me is all the calling out those names,
yeah,
Clemens, Clemens. You know how Patsy called his name at the end, Solomon, Solomon, right?
yeah,
Uh, the and Eliza called his name, Solomon, Solomon. So
yeah.
the calling out of the name of the person, come help me, come, I need your help, right? It's a very strong sense of calling out your name for help. Like, are you willing to listen when people call out your name for help? That is such a strong
Yeah.
picture for me right there.
Well, it's your identity. I mean, your name is who you are as a person, but I think that actually ties into the the debate over Black Lives Matters or All Lives Matters, right? When when I hear black people saying Black Lives Matters, they've never said all lives don't matter, but they're that slave in that moment, wanting someone that call out my name, recognize me, personalize me, because we are not being personalized. And that's why people get upset when you return with the all lives matters, which is actually a truth that I know black people have said over and over again. We're not saying that they don't. We're saying, say my name, you know, say my race, say my identity, see me. You know, it's more of one of recognition. I think that gets understood. Some people want to turn that into a debate about like almost a theological or an anthropological debate, which is there's a truth to what that statement says. But this is when one of your kids, you know, comes to you and asks you if you love me. You know, I don't say, well, I love all of God's children. You know, you say, I say, Evelyn, I love you, or I love my girls, or I love Kate. It doesn't. It's missing that. But people have this deep need, humans, to be recognized, and I do like that you pointed that out. That the calling out of the name, the pleading to be recognized is throughout
Mhm.
this movie. Absolutely, I am human is what it's saying over and over again. I'm a
And
person. I'm a
that is a
person.
voice of protest, right? It's a voice. It's asking for help. Someone when Black Lives Matter or any other protesters are out there calling out the governor, calling out the mayor, the police department. They are doing the exact same thing. We are being taken away. Our lives is being taken away. I'm here. Hear us out.
Yeah.
And what you keep seeing, the pattern in this movie is when you see when those people are being called upon, they're not able to do anything, even if they wanted to. Some of them just keep looking, like Clemens didn't even look back,
Right.
right?
Right.
Clemens didn't even look back. Solomon, towards the end, when Patsy's calling his name, he
Yeah.
looks back and he waves. It's almost like, even though you see that he couldn't do anything else, there is a sense of recognition of, I see you, I won't forget you. He gives her a big hug at the end, right? And again, it's bringing back that empathy and that humanity. You won't be forgotten. I see you. I know where you are. I'm coming back, in a sense,
Yeah.
or I will do something. Uh,
Yeah.
and so that was tremendous for me throughout the whole movie. You know, the and again, the argument of well, all lives matter. You know, first and foremost, nobody said that before. Somebody said Black Lives Matter. You
That's
know,
true.
so it is counterpunch,
It is.
kind of a way. Um, but you know, we again, Jesus, when he went to seek that lost sheep that was broken and battered and was lost, you know, that the parable of the good shepherd, the good shepherd didn't say, well, all sheep matter. He went out for that battered, beaten, lost sheep, and he went and rescued it, right? So when Jesus models this idea, that we seek out the lost, the battered, those who are out isolated, those who are in the margins, who are lost. That's what we do, you know. So I think we see through our scriptures the importance of recognizing those who are battered and and ostracized.
Yeah. I I think it's a powerful point, and one of the things I think we can do is is to tell from our side of people, white people, to be able to say to our black friends, our other persons of colors or marginalized folks, we see you. I mean, I remember how powerful it was on on 9/11 when President Bush stood on top of that rubble and the world felt like it had come crashing down, and these people had been working tirelessly. And he got up there with that bullhorn and he said, "We see you, you know, we hear you, you know," and it was all of this is not for it's not in vain. And man, if we white people could just understand that people just want to be seen and humanized before we go into talking and debating and all the other things that we want to say, which I think is actually another really good point that we have to listen. Empathy involves listening. You were talking about empathy earlier. Listen to the stories. And listening isn't when we're listening for a response, you know. If you try that with your spouse, you're in trouble. If you're listening, getting ready to respond with your argument about what your perspective or how their wrong is, you're out. It's not real community. It's not real love. It's not
Mhm.
real listening. And I think that there is this thread of a man telling his story and asking us to listen throughout the whole movie. Not that he's perfect; he doesn't respond perfectly at every level himself,
Hmm.
um, but but he asks us to listen to that experience. When he wrote the book originally in the 1800s, and then the filmmaker asks us to listen to the story, and I think that's really important. And nowadays, what's we talk about the second question kind of rolls into that a little bit. We've kind of been touching on it, but in what ways are we experiencing this now?
Hmm.
So we're not experiencing free black people being sold into slavery in the
Hmm.
sense that it was back then, because this is a different kind of slave story. These are white people going north and tricking or kidnapping black
Yeah,
people and
pretty much.
taking them to the south. But what this real like forebodingness is that even when you are a free black person, you're not really free.
They're not really free.
And I think that is a strong theme of today. Like, I don't have any black friends, and I'll allow you, as an Afro Latino, to be able to speak to this, who are not scared to be pulled over by the police,
Absolutely.
who know if they commit a minor infraction, their likelihood of a higher sentence goes up. That their freedom, even though that they've been free civil rights for a while, their freedom isn't really the same kind of freedom. And the
Absolutely.
laws may have changed, but the attitudes haven't, and there's still actually some bad laws and policies on the book. To me, that reminds me of Solomon's story. He grew up a free black man in New York, but it was still always under such threat because the broader world around him wasn't really free for him. So talk about that in your experience and
Oh, I was telling somebody the other day, uh, I don't recall who it was, but it was in my office, and I saw this special look. Uh, the whole thing is this: even though people of darker skin, even though we are freer than we were before, we're not as free as our people of white skin counterpart.
right,
So that's the difference. It's almost again this. If you remember that scene where he is being where he's still in that I don't know, like a jail, and the guy comes and brings him a t-shirt, a clean t-shirt, right? And he says, what, no gratitude? So you got a nice T-shirt. You're still in chains, but you still should thank me because I got your T-shirt, even though you're in chains, right? So it's this idea. It's the same idea. Oh, you have no gratitude that you can vote. You have no gratitude that you can go to public schools. You have no gratitude that you haven't you weren't really slaves, but we even though we are freer, we are not as free as our white counterparts.
no,
So
yeah,
that's what people need to understand. It's not the same level. I was pulled over about 6 weeks ago when I was driving right here in Oklahoma City on Council Road, and this police officer was behind me, and then he got next to me, sees my face, gets behind me again, and pulls me over. I don't know why. I'm on my way to a meeting. It's about just before 6 o'clock, and he comes. Say he doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't say, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" All he comes and asks me a sarcastic question, and tells me, "How long have you been driving?" And I said, "A long time." And he tells me that I'm not supposed to step on the median line, on the yellow line in the middle of the road. I said, "Sir, I wasn't aware I was doing that." And he said, "Oh yeah, you did it several times, and that's dangerous. You can kill somebody." I said, "Sir, I wasn't aware. I'm sorry if I did, but I really didn't see it." And he said, "Be more careful next time," but in a very rude tone way. Didn't say his name. Didn't ask me what. He didn't say, "Do you know what I pulled you over?" And because I maybe touched that yellow line a couple of times, right? And so that's the kind of stuff that makes me wonder, like, am I as free as my white counterparts? And the reality is no.
no,
So that is the outcry, and that is what you see, and that is in that very scene when he gives him that shirt, a fresh shirt, and he says, "You should be thankful, but you're still in chains and you're still locked up over
right.
here." So that is what people need to understand right there.
Yeah, and I've heard that response from some white folk that you know what's the big deal, black people? We gave you a black president. We gave you civil rights. We gave you this stuff. Why are you so upset? Like, why are you in the streets protesting? And I think the reality of it is that very point. It's not really freedom of. It's not equality. There might be some more equality under the law, although that's pretty debatable. We did change a lot of laws, and I think it's important to say that progress actually has been made, and so people know that progress can be made.
Absolutely.
So why wouldn't they keep asking for it until the progress is finished, until we get to the point where we're equal? So people just, I gave you a little bit. So what is that about? Are you trying to appease people, or are you actually trying to work for equality? It reminds me of a couple stories in the news. The one most recent one is Elijah McClain in Aurora, where had we not made a stink about it, had people not got up and said, no, let's look at this case from a year ago, where this scrawny little eclectic black young man who played the violin for cats at the shelter um, was basically jumped by three police officers and brutally assaulted. The kid's a tiny little waif, I don't. He was no threat. The
Mhm.
words that are recorded of him trying to de-escalate the cops' aggressive behavior, his last words recorded, and then they still made fun of him. Uh, they threatened to sick a dog on him because he was, I think, convulsing, and then they tried to hide their evidence. And then that same police department just accosted a bunch of peaceful protesters holding a vigil, playing the violin. I mean, this freedom, if you go against power, which I think African American people really are used to doing because the power is always against them. But
Mhm.
when you're a white person like me and you're going against the power, you do put yourself under threat. It goes back to that first slave owner, Mr. Ford. He's not
Absolutely.
ready to make any kind of sacrifice. He doesn't want to
Absolutely.
oppose the power. He wants
Yeah.
to play with the power a little bit, and I think that's something. The other one was the black man in New York who was bird watching, and the white liberal lady, this is a better example, maybe even. The white liberal lady is freaked out because he said, hey, you have to have your dog on a leash. And she goes from being,
Mhm.
liberal woke to I'm going to call the cops and basically knowing like it was with Elijah. Someone called the cops on Elijah because they reported a suspicious black man who was walking home.
Mhm.
And so if you're a black man, especially, and you get the cops called on you, and someone preps them with suspicious, your life could be in danger. And she
Uh,
knows that, and so she basically threatens him. The guy bird watching. I'm going to tell him a black man is threatening me and everything, and that is, that could be her setting up his murder effectively because
Absolutely.
she knows and she has to come out later and no, I'm really not like that. I'm really no, but when it comes down to it, to the point of sacrifice, you are that, you know.
And that is what, as you say, the first slave owner, the better slave owner, that is exactly what he portrays, right? I could give you this humanity as much, but when it costs me something, right? When it's gonna cost me some sacrifice, I'm not willing to go that far. I can't put myself, because again, it's part of the system. He understands there's a system, and he understands that, if I do this, what will my white counterparts say of me? And that's another question. How much pressure do you think there is in this, for people of white color like you, that are allies, to African American folks? How much pressure do you think there is with other, in a white society, with your other white friends, or other white acquaintances, or even family members, where they think like, wait, yeah, like, why are you defending these people? Quink, quink, you're one of us.
Yeah,
Does that happen? I don't know.
it does. It does. I could name some particular instances, but here's what it really brings up to my mind. People have a bad argument when they devolve to name calling and labeling, right? And
Mm.
so I speak up, and I actually try to speak in ways that I think people on the other side will hear better, because I know that language matters, and I try to be even nonviolent in my language. But someone feels a threat when they attack you with, oh, you're a social justice warrior, or you have white guilt, or um, you think you're woke, and I'm like, none of these things that I've actually claimed for myself. I'm just speaking the truth in love, as far as I'm concerned, and wanting to highlight what's actually happening in our society. And man, do people come and not only do they label you, then they start putting words in your mouth, like things that you would had never said. And a lot of times this will happen on Facebook. I'm like, I invite you to go back and read everything I said, and those words are never there. But it goes back to that lack of listening. So they don't want to hear. So they attack me because they might have seen me as one of them. And if we don't rally, circle the wagons together, then the whole the whole line isn't going to hold. And so yes, there is some stepping out of line. There's threat. Um, there's threat as a pastor where you experience that when you start going in a direction like this, that people will threaten to leave the church, stop giving, make your life difficult because they don't want to hear this, and they'll try to pull out Bible verses. It becomes like this weird Bible verse. You saw the slave owner in there do that, pull out the Bible and said it's in the Bible, and so very very limited biblical understanding, but it's always aggressive. Uh, it's what I think people insecure people do when they feel their power is threatened. And so yes, I realize that the other side of sacrifice that comes is it it does make, in some ways, if you keep pressing down this road, it makes your life less secure, right? So you do bring on, will you get the same job opportunities? Should you give up job opportunities to people who have less power, um, if you're going to live out your life with integrity? And you start asking your question, like, what really does it mean um, for me to sacrifice, and not just be talking about this, in some kind of academic way, and knowing that the way of the kingdom of God is death and resurrection. So there is always a sacrifice of laying down our own lives. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't compare it to getting pulled over and being fearing for my life, having the police called on me most of the time. They're really nice to me. But no, I think actually the most vitriol that I've experienced is from other Christians, though. They have come out in some cases really full force, which is kind of shocking in some ways. So yeah, I guess it's there.
And then you can see it again. You can see it. I think I think in a sense this movie also portrays, in a sense, I would say four kinds of white white people in this situation. You got the first plantation owner who wants to be nice and wants to treat people okay, but when it comes to costing something, doesn't is not willing to go that far. There's the other plantation owner who actually married a black woman. He was kind of, but he didn't care about anybody else. He's saying, I'm happy, I'm here with my own thing, and I know I'm no racist. Obviously, my wife is black, but
Right.
that's about it. You got
Yeah.
the really mean plantation owner who is, I mean, terrible. But then at the end, you got the guy that Brad Pitt plays, the who's not a plantation owner, who is a builder, and he is the one who has the courage, and he acknowledges, my life could be in danger for doing this, but he does it, right? So you have these different people that all of them have some privilege and some power to do something at one point or another, and it takes one with the right convictions and a lot of courage, uh, to because again the first one had somebody right convictions but didn't have the courage to go beyond. So that is very interesting to see. As all of them were feeling the were in the same system, feeling the same pressure that you're talking about, what could happen to them if they turn their back on their kind, and kind of a thing. But only one of them was said, you know what, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it that is it's a fascinating thing all throughout, because it is kind of that, it's kind of the same. I've got black friends, you know, but we've heard a lot from the Black Lives Matter folk, other people, my brother's keeper, um, people out there who are doing the work that basically have said it's not enough to be just not a racist. You have to be anti-racist. It has to actually be something intentional that you decide you're going to engage in, and it can and it will when you decide to be that. When you decide to, it will come with sacrifice. It just all good things, I think, in some sense, come with some kind of sacrifice. And I think about that now. If you think about modern day slavery, even if you take slavery out of just this our current African American experience, to realize that the reason why things at Walmart are so cheap because we employ slave labor around the world. At what point are we really complicit with people suffering and we're not willing to look a little bit further to go, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to buy from there anymore. Maybe we need to call our whole economic system into into account in one way or another. The people who work for the for-profit prisons. I mean, if you're a Christian and you're going to oppose modern day slavery, you see a lot of that in the for-profit prison system. It essentially doing the same thing that we saw in this movie, taking free people, not necessarily just kidnapping them, but making severe charges for minor crimes to keep for-profit prisons filled. Well, people are employed in those, guards and cooks, and people are making money off those investments. And how far are we really willing to go to dismantle the systems that really are abusive? And because it will mean it means a financial cost, which is why the Bible talks so much about mammon as a god, right? That's a huge, huge problem. So, and I want to remind everybody else who's watching, Braden and Brad are having a good discussion and some things in the chat. So make sure you're reading the chat. Brad mentioned that the Zulu greeting Suabona means I see you. So, we were talking about that earlier, being seen and recognizing someone. And in the African heritage, that there's a word for that. I see you, and it's complex. And thinking about that, Braden's brought up some good points about resistance even during the slave times. And I think we know that it's built in us, and I think we all know. Look at what's happened. People have lost their minds when someone says wear a mask in public. I mean, some people have lost their mind.
Absolutely.
But where do they go to? They go to it's my freedom. There's something deeply ingrained in us that resists being enslaved. I
Mm,
think that's a God thing. I mean, deep down, not that I'm saying that that's necessarily the right response in that situation, but human beings resist the idea of being entrapped or enslaved with no options. You
mm,
want to make someone depressed really quickly? Tell them they don't have any options,
mm,
even as a free person. You're stuck in this minimum wage job. You know, there's no eligible person out here for you to actually date or marry. You're not going to be able to move out of this country or state or out of this small town or whatever.
mm,
it it messes with our minds,
mm,
that we realize we're not maybe as free as we thought that we were. And so how can you blame people when everybody has that same reaction to a perceived infringement on their freedoms? How can you blame a group of people who are saying we live in that lack of freedom every
mm.
day? And um, and I think that we're not. It's funny that those people that would complain like about masks, in my world, have been some of the same people that want us to just not care about what black people are saying right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, oh well, what's the big deal?
It's very funny. It's very paradoxical, and I think that the biggest issue is something as somebody that came to this country, as somebody that is a foreigner in this land, something that I found very fascinating about the America is that everybody wants the right. Everybody wants to have the right, but very few people want to have the responsibility,
Oh, that's a
right?
good. Yeah.
So with every right, there is a responsibility that you have to assume. Dr. Fauci was talking. I was listening on the radio today. He was saying we you are responsible for yourself, but you also have a societal responsibility. You have a responsibility with society in terms of doing the right thing so that the virus won't spread.
Yeah.
So the issue with, yes, you have a right, but you also have the responsibility with society at large to
Yeah.
do the right thing for the well-being of the world and your neighbor, right? So that is something that I think people have lost the sight of a lot when people bring all the amendments, and all that. They okay, yes, but you have a responsibility. If you got this privilege to have this right, there's also a responsibility that comes with it, and that's what people don't that have a hard time fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, you're getting into that third question. What is the gospel? How does it speak into this kind of situation? And you're mentioning it, so the gospel never mentions rights. The Constitution mentions God given rights, um, but the gospel doesn't. The gospel flips that and says that um, we have a responsibility to our neighbor. We have a
Mhm.
responsibility to lay down our lives for the benefit of others. And so,
Mhm.
what's been really strange in all of this is how much the Christian response has been my rights, my way, my perspective. And that's the white Christian response in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
and not how can I get down, take off the towel around my waist, and wash the feet of these people who are obviously suffering.
Yes.
I feel like if we went in terms of service and sacrifice, then we could actually resolve a lot of the things that we're doing. But we'd really rather demand our rights and our privileges and our preferences, and we those all really matter more to us when Jesus says, in order to really live, you have to lay down your life. What is he
Mhm.
asking us to give up? He's
Mhm.
asking us to give up all of the things that I just mentioned.
Mhm.
That and he says you're not worthy to be his disciple if you're going to hang on to those things. And I think when Jesus is talking in the gospel about there being a narrow way, it's not just I got to say the right singular prayer to become a Christian. It's that following Jesus on this road, it's a narrow path, and not a lot of people want to take it. They want to stay on the easy path.
Mhm.
And being a disciple, being a Christian, is not necessarily an easy path, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think of the gospel, I think of it literally, how do we lay down our lives for others? To proclaim the truth of the kingdom of God. And you want to proclaim the truth that all lives matter, or that there's no Jew nor Greek or slave nor free, then you have to live that out. You can't just say it. You can't say it as a counter to it, to one person trying to be seen, but you definitely have to live and act like those lives matter. It's
Absolutely.
proactive. So I
Absolutely.
think
So
Jesus does that.
this is I love it. I get a lot of things in my mind. This is so fascinating. So when you talk about neighboring, right? Jesus came to show us who truly is our neighbor. And the Pharisee asked this question to Jesus. Jesus said, "Hey, what can I do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, who is my neighbor?" And then Jesus comes with this parable of the so-called Good Samaritan, right? In their minds, there was no such a thing. There was no such a thing as a good
Right.
Samaritan. So in
Right.
their mind, this is a terrible thing. A guy that was a Samaritan
Yeah.
that helped one of us.
Yeah.
So Jesus brings a big thing. Who about restructuring who are our neighbors
Yeah.
and changing the point of view as to your neighbor is whoever is right around you, who is in need, who is around you. That's your neighbor, and that touches my life because it reminds me when I came here to the United States, 2007. There was a big tornado in Greensburg, Kansas, destroyed the whole town. We went to the mission trip out there. I just wanted to get out of the campus. So I was, what is this thing all about? A mission trip with all these American people. And, part of me, when I went over there, part of me was saying, you know what, this they're not your people. They're getting help from the government. Why something was kind of fighting me, saying, why are you here helping when there are more people suffering in your own country? But that was the voice of, I believe, the enemy. But I really, something then told me, you know what, you need to be where you're needed. Wherever you are, there is gonna be a need. Your neighbor is whoever is in need right around you. So in terms of that, I think Jesus speaks very strongly about neighboring, and in terms of also Paul speaks actually very directly about rights. In First Corinthians chapter 9, he said, you said you have the right to do this, and you said that, but I'm telling you, I give up my own rights as an apostle so that the gospel could be brought to you. Paul gave up his own rights. Paul, if you read First Corinthians very carefully. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1 18, he established the logos of the cross, right? The framework, the way to operate of the cross is this way when you give up even your own rights for the sake of others. So Paul is actually in 1 Corinthians 9, it's very usually the words right specifically to address the issue because when you first the Corinthians were all about the rights, and when you are all about that, you become very self-centered. You don't care about the community, and Paul is very clear on that right there, and very clear on this, Philippians chapter 2.
Well, and you bring that Samaritan story in, and you watch. It's the religious leader. It's the people who should know better. It's the people with the power who walk by, and they see the guy on the side of the road, but they choose to do nothing for
Mm,
whatever reason, inconvenience, fear, all these other things. And it's the Samaritan who you've already mentioned cannot be good to a Jewish person of the first century. Samaritans, there were no good ones, and they demonstrate neighborliness. So maybe one of the ways that the gospel speaks into this is we ask ourselves the question, who is our neighbor, and what does it mean to be a good neighbor? More than who's on our side, are they Christian? Do I
that's it.
agree with their organization at every point that they have, and all these other debate topics that get us away from that central question:
Mm,
who is my neighbor,
mm,
and how do I treat the neighbor? And so I think that, and it doesn't take away our acts of compassion and justice are our own. Whatever that person does, hey, maybe the guy on the side of the road, let's say in American understanding, he was a criminal and he deserved to get beat up. We didn't,
mm,
he didn't try to adjudicate all that. He
mm,
did what was his job, his responsibility, as the Samaritan did. And so I think that's the kind of thing we, as the church, need to reclaim the laying down of our lives,
mm,
which is part of the holiness ethic, surrendering, dying to self, rising with Christ, and looking at people in that humanizing, neighborly love way, and never falling into the tribalism,
mm,
the division that comes by saying, well, you're not me, you're not one of us, or
mm.
you probably deserve that, or all that, which is just, it's not neighborly at all. And so maybe those are two good gospel responses. What do you think then, as a church nowadays? Um, what can the church do to speak into this, since we don't actually have slavery in the way that we saw it in the movie? What are some steps the church could take to begin to break out of modern day types of slavery where there's definite inequality of treatment of others, and that the freedom for people of color, for black Americans, is not the same as it is for white Americans? Um, what can the church do? How does the church occupy this space?
I think one of the things, especially I would say for a predominantly white church, which in our context, in the Church of the Nazarene, that is what it is. I think it's not so much about, because I think many people kind of have somewhat of the idea of what to do, but I think it's about a posture. What posture do you take? And I think with a widely dominated church needs to take a posture of humility, a posture of listening, a posture of uh, openness and true hospitality
Mm-hmm.
to diversity, to different gifts and different ethnicities. So you have to find a way to take that posture and incorporate it into your culture and who you are. Because that what I have found is that many many white churches, predominantly white churches, they know the right thing to say. They will call me brother. They will call me you're welcome here. But when the rubber meets the road, when it's time to make a decision on behalf of the impoverished, the minority, or with people that are suffering, with whether it's Latino or African American people, they're not willing to put to put investments in there. They're not willing to say yes, we will listen, and we will welcome you. And not only that, we will even reallocate some of our budget to do something about it. Because again, uh, uh, many people, they're very prompt to have to give 10,000, $20,000 to a project overseas, but they have a hard time dealing with homeless folks or Latino folks or African American folks, and they don't. And so what they, because the first thing is, well, what did they do to get themselves there?
Yeah.
That's the question. Again, that's not the question that the Samaritan asked. Well, what
Right.
do you do to get yourself beaten? You shouldn't have been walking on this road. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
He
Right.
just helped him. Why
Yeah.
were you walking on this road? This late at night. You're so stupid. This your fault, right? That's
Yeah.
not what he did. So
Nobody did. Yeah.
you gotta have this posture of we we are humbly want to listen, and we humbly wanna be friends and good neighbors of you. And not only we will say so, but we will show with our actions, with our attitude, and with our posture when you come to church on Sunday. When you are part of our small groups, when when we work with you to work, and we support social justice, and we fight against racial inequality. That is the kind of stuff when we are not afraid of saying that from our pulpit. Well, that's another thing. They say, oh, I don't want to be political. Church cannot be political, which is, again, funny to me, because there are plenty of times where these white predominant churches are very, very political in the statements that they make, and they want to make it how they
Yeah.
present themselves. So, so again, we want to be able to have that true posture of honesty and sincerity. And if you don't understand, don't pretend like you do. Ask questions.
That's good.
If I think one of another issue is that I've seen many white folks coming to me or coming to somebody else of color, and they pretend like they completely understand the struggle, or if you don't understand, and we look at each other and we think he's trying, but he doesn't understand. So uh, you need to be able to have that, again, that posture of humility. Hey, we don't have it all together. We don't understand it. We want you to be part of it. We don't want you to be part of here of us just so that we can say we have a black person here. We want you to be part of us because we love you, and the Lord has brought us together, right? So that's,
Yeah.
I think, the posture
Yeah.
is a big thing.
I like that. The posture, the preaching, um, the politics of the kingdom. Jesus outlines what his kingdom looks like and how it operates. And sometimes there's an overlap with what we're able to do in our society. But I think when we preach the politic of the kingdom, and I think that's really good. What to me that stands out of what I can do and what I've tried to do, and I try to do more of, is what I think of representation and access in the church. I did this for young people. Um, we I remember being a part of conversations about the emerging church and all this kind of stuff, and it was with people who were old enough to be the grandparents of the emerging church, and no one from their 20s. So you're not going to get anywhere if they don't have access to leadership, if they don't have a seat at the table to have the conversation. And I think we've definitely, the white church, the white evangelical church, has done that. Even ones who've tried to do ministry to communities because they care, um, have not developed leadership, have not given people roles or permission. In some sense, permission is the wrong word. Um, the ability to, the safe place to vocalize their opinions and their thoughts about church and what it means. We still have a model that we inherited from revivalism, that was geared towards white folks, a lot of rural white folks, and not really geared towards any persons of color. So it's like when we bring young people, young black teenagers, um, Latinos, and those people, and they have roles in leading worship, not because they're supremely qualified and not always because they're supremely talented, but because it matters to see representation, to see that glass ceiling that I think a lot of my black friends feel like is there no matter what they do. They might be invited on the committee, but there's like one person, one black person on a committee of 20 people, and everybody else is white and male. That's not real represent. That's tokenism. It's a start, but it's not really representation. And I think trying to find representation and access, giving power away, churches, I think, need to look at their own structures because we inherited these structures that I don't think it's necessarily by choice. I don't think it's necessarily by volition, but they keep people oppressed on some level. They
mm,
keep them as feeling like second class citizens on some level
mm,
because you can only go so high. And then this is white people land up here. They get to make all the decisions. They preach sermons the way they want to hear sermons preached. Uh, Potlucks serve their food. I mean, all that kind of thing that, well, you might be invited to the potluck, but you don't get to help plan it. You don't get to lead it. You don't get to talk at it. Whatever it is, that's a different level where that freedom and this whole thing we talk about equality of freedom, and the freedom that Solomon had was not the same as any other white person in America at that time, any other white person in the Northeast at that time. No matter
mm,
how free, he was born free, still wasn't
mm.
free. And I think our churches, which are very segregated in white evangelicalism, very very segregated. I think it's because of that. We really don't actually. We'll welcome you. We like your numbers. We like people showing up. We like some of the benefits of having people around. But when it comes to our preferences and music and all that other kind of stuff, whoa, whoa, whoa. If you don't meet my criteria, you don't get to get past that glass ceiling. So I think churches have to look at how our structures empower people of color. If you want people of color to come to your church, you begin with that posture, whether you extend it into to your programs and the politics of the church, the way that we organize the church, and and that will change things and bring a kingdom, which is what the Holy Spirit does in Acts, right? Brings the Holy Spirit. It's on all these different tongues and tribes and everything, and everyone's meeting together all of the time. They're all having everything in common. Common being very emphasized in the Book of Acts, and I don't think we have things in common, and we've not emphasized that. So I think that the church can address its own structures and empower people. Um,
I think when you bring something very interesting in regards to what we have inherited, right?
right,
I remember there was a white missionary that I told my dad that we couldn't use Dominican instruments in our services because it's not Nazarene enough.
right,
So what we have inherited, and it's funny because in the evangelical movement, we have tended to pretend or to reject explicit tradition. However, we have a very clear tradition of the way we do liturgy, which
right,
is very quiet, very reflective. I remember somebody telling me, "Oh, I just don't race and sing at church because I was taught that a church is a place to revere. A church is
yes,
a place to be quiet and reflect." Well,
yes,
if you are come from African American tradition, church is a place to rejoice. Church is a place to shout. Church is a
right,
place to have a great time.
yes,
So which tradition is more valid, right?
yes,
And so you have to think about where does that come from, and how can we then say, first and foremost, recognize that there is a tradition that we have perpetuated, that has allowed people of color and black people not to be able to enjoy and bring about the riches of their tradition.
Right. It infringes
So
our preferences. So
right, so
you can only go
so
so far. Yeah.
so that's that we have to recognize that, and we have to then counterbalance it with reason, experience, and the scripture, and look into it, but also look through the lens of the diversity that God gave us, look through the lens of culture. I will submit that we have to not just use the quadrilateral, but also really study uh, culture and diversity in the church and how that reflects the kingdom. Uh, just like the church in the book of Revelation, people of all nations, of all tribes, of all colors, praising God.
Well, the answers are there in our church's history. Even in the Church of the Nazarene, even in evangelical churches, we got away from it and allowed other cultural systems to be imposed on us. It's been a great discussion. We've been on for an hour, and I think it's a good thing to leave this off with people to have conversations with their friends. What we hope in having this conversation together and opening up the chat is that you can voice some ideas. It really only Braden and Brad really talked together tonight, but there are some things that we can even pick up on
Mhm.
some of these comments for next time, next week when we talk about the documentary 13th.
Mm,
So, Rody, thank you for your
absolutely.
thoughts, and
Yeah.
we'll have another couple on here next week talking about that. Same channel on YouTube, and just keep praying and seeking. We don't have all the answers, but we begin by turning towards one another, seeing each other, and talking and listening. So,
Amen.
grace and peace to everyone who's joined us tonight or who will watch this as a recording. And we'll see you next week, 8:30 Central on this YouTube channel, discussing the movie 13th. Thank you.
Peace.